Early Church Fathers, October 7th readings. Tertullian, The Prescription Against Heretics, chapters 39 to 41. Spiritual wickednesses, how Scripture supplies material for heresy. These were the ingenious arts of spiritual wickednesses, wherewith we also, my brethren, may fairly expect to have to wrestle, as necessary for faith, that the elect may be made manifest, and that the reprobate may be discovered. And therefore they possess influence, and a facility in thinking out and fabricating errors, which ought not to be wondered at as if it were a difficult and inexplicable process, seeing that in profane writings also an example comes ready to hand of a similar facility. You see in our own day, composed out of Virgil, a story of a wholly different character, the subject matter being arranged according to the verse, and the verse according to the subject matter. In short, Hosidius Geta has most completely pilfered his tragedy of Medea from Virgil. A near relative of my own, among some leisure productions of his pen, has composed out of the same poet the Table of Cebes. On the same principle, those poetasters are commonly called Homerocentones, collectors of Homeric odds and ends, who stitch into one piece, patchwork fashion, works of their own from the lines of Homer, out of many scraps put together from this passage and from that in miscellaneous confusion. Now unquestionably the divine scriptures are more fruitful in resources of all kinds for this sort of facility. Nor do I risk contradiction in saying that the very scriptures were even arranged by the will of God in such a manner as to furnish materials for heretics, inasmuch as I read that there must be heresies, which there cannot be without the scriptures. The devil's counterfeit, idolatry imitating divine rights, scripture corrupted for perversity. The question will arise, by whom is to be interpreted the sense of the passages which make for heresies? By the devil, of course, to whom pertain those wiles which pervert the truth, and who, by the mystic rites of his idols, vies even with the essential portions of the sacraments of God. He too baptizes some, that is, his own believers and faithful followers. He promises the putting away of sins by a laver of his own. And if my memory still serves me, Mithra there, in the kingdom of Satan, sets his marks on the foreheads of his soldiers, celebrates also the oblation of bread, and introduces an image of a resurrection, and before a sword wreathes a crown. What also must we say to Satan's limiting his chief priest to a single marriage? He too has his virgins. He too has his proficients in continence. Suppose now we revolve in our minds the superstitions of Numa Pompilius, and consider his priestly offices and badges and privileges, his sacrificial services too, and the instruments and vessels of the sacrifices themselves, and the curious rites of his expiations and vows. Is it not clear to us that the devil imitated the well-known moroseness of the Jewish law? Since, therefore, he has shown such emulation in his great aim of expressing, in the concerns of his idolatry, those very things of which consists the administration of Christ's sacraments, it follows, of course, that the same being, possessing still the same genius, both set his heart upon and succeeded in, adapting to his profane and rival creed the very documents of divine things and of the Christian saints. His interpretation from their interpretations, his words from their words, his parables from their parables. For this reason, then, no one ought to doubt, either that spiritual wickednesses, from which also heresies come, have been introduced by the devil, or that there is any real difference between heresies and idolatry, seeing that they appertain both to the same author and the same work that idolatry does. They either pretend that there is another God in opposition to the Creator, or, even if they acknowledge that the Creator is the one only God, they treat of him as a different being from what he is in truth. The consequence is that every lie which they speak of God is in a certain sense a sort of idolatry. The conduct of heretics, laxity, worldliness, and disorder, especially among their women, I must not omit an account of the conduct also of the heretics, how frivolous it is, how worldly, how merely human, without seriousness, without authority, without discipline, as suits their creed. To begin with, it is doubtful who is a catechumen and who a believer. They have all access alike, they hear alike, they pray alike, even heathens, if any such happen to come among them. That which is holy they will cast to the dogs and their pearls, although, to be sure, they are not real ones, they will fling to the swine. Simplicity they will have to consist in the overthrow of discipline, attention to which on our part they call brothelry. Peace also they huddle up anyhow with all comers, for it matters not to them, however different be their treatment of subjects, provided only they can conspire together to storm the citadel of the one only truth. All are puffed up, all offer you knowledge. Their catechumens are perfect before they are full taught. The very women of these heretics, how wanton they are! For they are bold enough to teach, to dispute, to enact exorcisms, to undertake cures, it may be even to baptize. Their ordinations are carelessly administered, capricious, changeable. At one time they put novices in office, at another time men who are bound to some secular employment, at another persons who have apostatized from us, to bind them by vainglory, since they cannot by the truth. Nowhere is promotion easier than in the camp of rebels, where the mere fact of being there is a foremost service. And so it comes to pass that today one man is their bishop, tomorrow another. Today he is a deacon, who tomorrow is a reader. Today he is a presbyter, who tomorrow is a layman. For even on laymen do they impose the functions of priesthood. Augustine of Hippo, The Confessions, Book 13, Chapter 15, The Firmament of Scripture, a heavenly skin of authority. Or who but thou, our God, made for us that firmament of authority over us in thy divine Scripture? As it is said, for heaven shall be folded up like a scroll, and now it is extended over us like a skin. For thy divine Scripture is of more sublime authority, since those mortals through whom thou didst dispense it unto us underwent mortality. And thou knowest, O Lord, thou knowest, how thou with skins didst clothe men, when by sin they became mortal. Whence as a skin hast thou stretched out the firmament of thy book, that is to say, thy harmonious words, which by the ministry of mortals thou hast spread over us. For by their very death is that solid firmament of authority in thy discourses, set forth by them more sublimely extended above all things that are under it, the which, while they were living here, was not so eminently extended. Thou hadst not as yet spread abroad the heaven like a skin. Thou hadst not as yet noised everywhere the report of their deaths. Look upon the heavens. Scripture resists pride and makes the humble wise. Let us look, O Lord, upon the heavens, the work of thy fingers. Clear from our eyes that mist with which thou hast covered them. There is that testimony of thine which giveth wisdom unto the little ones. Perfect, O my God, thy praise out of the mouth of babes and sucklings. Nor have we known any other books so destructive to pride, so destructive to the enemy and the defender, who resisteth thy reconciliation in defense of his own sins. I know not, O Lord, I know not other such pure words which so persuade me to confession, and make my neck submissive to thy yoke, and invite me to serve thee for naught. Let me understand these things, good Father. Grant this to me, placed under them, because thou hast established these things for those placed under them. Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, Part 1-2. Question 20. Of the good and malice of exterior human acts. Question. Whether the exterior acts of man, as outward deeds or omissions, are properly good or evil, and by what elements they receive a moral species and imputability. Objection. It seems that exterior acts cannot properly be called morally good or evil, since moral judgment pertains to the will and to the interior choice. Outward motions of the body are indifferent, and only the inward act of willing carries moral worth. Further, if we judge an outward deed by its consequences, the same external deed might sometimes lead to good results and sometimes to evil ones, which makes moral judgment ambiguous. Hence, exterior acts cannot fix moral species. Finally, because many outward acts follow from ignorance, habit, or passion rather than from deliberate choice, they should not be treated as properly moral in themselves. Responsio, I answer that exterior acts done by man are truly and properly subject to moral praise or blame, but their moral species depends on their relation to the will and to the ordered reason that should govern the will. An exterior act becomes a human moral act when it proceeds from deliberate choice or from an internal act of the will, and it takes its moral character principally from the proximate object chosen, what is done, secondarily from the end or intention, for what purpose it is done, and further from the circumstances that modify the act's species or its gravity. Thus, an outward deed that expresses and completes an interior will whether to give, to strike, to speak, or to omit, is morally configured by the same elements that configure interior acts: object, end, circumstances, and the agent's knowledge and consent. Nevertheless, not every exterior motion is imputable in the same way. Where an outward act is merely a bodily movement without deliberate consent, or where ignorance, extreme compulsion, or overpowering passion removes the agent's choice, the act lacks moral imputability, or is only partially imputable. Omissions are to be reckoned among exterior human acts when the agent, having the duty and the ability, intentionally or negligently omits what ought to be done. Such omissions are morally rated by the object omitted, the end, whether the omission pursued some good or selfish end, and the surrounding circumstances. Finally, cooperation with another's sin, material or formal, is an exterior mode that must be judged. If one knowingly and willingly assists another's wrongful external act, one is implicated. If one's external contribution is remote, unintended, or done under coercion, the guilt is diminished or absent. In sum, exterior acts are genuinely moral acts when they express the will. Their goodness or malice flows from the ordered unity of object, intention, circumstances, and the degree of consent. Quick Summa. Exterior human acts are properly moral when they proceed from the will. Their goodness or malice is determined principally by the object chosen, secondarily by the end, modified by circumstances, and finally by the agent's knowledge, consent, and habitual disposition. William's evening. An illustration of interior and exterior moral weight. William sat in the warehouse doorway, the night chill on his shoulders, the delivery manifest on his lap. The company had miscounted inventory. A pallet of goods marked for donation had been logged as sold. The driver asked him to sign the receipt and just note the discrepancy later, an outward act that would have hidden the mistake and let the sale stand. William felt two things: an inward tug of anger at the driver's indifferent shrug, and a quieter, clearer judgment that the records should be true. First, a thought rose as a mere temptation. Sign now, let it go, it's only paperwork. That was a fleeting interior stir, excused in itself. Then William deliberated. He imagined the consequences, the charity that would lose supplies, the trust the company owed its clients. His will began to take shape, either to consent to a wrongful concealment or to refuse and insist on correction. When he finally placed his name and refused the driver's suggestion, the exterior act, the signature, and the spoken correction expressed the interior intention to uphold truth. Had he signed with a deceitful intention, the outward signature would have been sinful even if no one later noticed. Had he signed by mistake without deliberation, culpability would have been reduced. Later, when the manager asked why he had delayed the shipment, William explained. His outward deeds bore praise because the object he chose, truthful record-keeping, was ordered to a right end, justice and charity. The circumstances, night, pressure, heightened the difficulty but did not excuse concealment, and his consent was deliberate. William's story shows how exterior acts cannot be divorced from the interior life. Bodily motions become morally meaningful when they express chosen objects and intentions, and their blame or merit depends on the ordered whole of object, end, circumstance, and consent.